Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design here at the University of Toronto. I'm Mason White. I'm the director of the Master of Architecture program here. A little louder, says my boss. Before introducing tonight's speaker, I want to take some time to acknowledge the sponsor of tonight's lecture and the lecture series happening this year, which is by Bulthaup. Of course, Bulthaup has not only provided support for tonight's lecture, it's been providing support for lectures the last 6 years here at the Daniels faculty. The Bulthaup lectures showcase an international array of some of the world's best and brightest in the field of architecture, design, and landscape, and sustainable urbanization. This year, past Bulthaup lectures have featured Greg Pasquarelli of Shop Architects in New York, Paris and Lisbon-based architect and artist Didier Faustino, and Jean Gang of Studio Gang in Chicago. And there will be one more in the Bulthaup series from Liz Diller of Diller Scofidio Renfro, which I believe is on April 2nd. Is that right? April 2nd. That will be confirmed, but I'm certain it's something close to that. The Bulthaup brand is known worldwide for its focus on architecture of living spaces. Here in Toronto, this focus is on display at its 280 King Street showroom in the homes and in the homes of discerning clients. Stefan Sabidlo, who's visiting us here this evening for the lecture series. Stefan, can you identify yourself briefly? Thank you. I would ask that we take a moment now to show our appreciation to Bulthaup for their continued sponsorship of the lecture series this year and the past 6 years. Stefan, thank you so much again. Which we're very thankful that it has extended now into very much into a very powerful international stature. We have our speaker has traveled here from Croatia, which is, I understand, it's actually only his second time in Canada and his first time in Toronto, so it's really exciting to share the work of their office with this audience. So, we're very pleased to welcome Hrvoje Njiric to the Daniels faculty to present the next Bulthaup lecture. Njiric's projects are inspired by what he sees as necessity to tackle a variety of issues and to push them to the limits. He has said that architecture firms should be as open as possible to different projects and opportunities, and that it is vital for architects to promote and to protect public space. Njiric's recent housing designs are inspired by critiques of the overproduction of dwellings in post-war Croatia. His firm has also investigated the typologies of public buildings, such as schools and libraries. But it is visionary projects that question the constraints of current architectural production that Njiric sees as the most essential part of his practice. He advises young architects to go beyond stereotypes, patterns, and typologies that exist within architectural manuals, developers' portfolios, tourist guides, government laws, arguing that a radical examination of present-day conditions are necessary in order to create a morally diverse framework for action. Hrvoje Njiric completed his studies in architecture at the architectural faculty at the University of Zabreb in Croatia. From 1990 to 2001, he was partner in the provocative young practice Njiric and Njiric, arhitekti. Since 2001, he has been the principal of Njiric Plus arhitekti and has grown to become one of the most prominent architects in Europe, where he has won numerous competitions and awards. Njiric has been engaged in teaching since the mid-1990s. He has served as a full-time professor at the TU Graz, the GAF Split, and ESTAM in Madrid. He has been a guest professor in schools such as the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, and the University of Ferrara in Italy, and Aarhus University of Denmark. He has also been a visiting critic at the ETSAB Barcelona, and the AA School of Architecture in London, the ETH in Zurich, and Strathclyde University of Glasgow, and the Southeast University of Nanjing, among many others. Njiric has also been a unit master of various international workshops and has lectured in many cities worldwide, including Calgary, locally. Hrvoje Njiric's talk this evening is titled Affordable Utopias. Please join me in welcoming Njiric to the podium. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight. First, I have to say that I'm really flattered by this introduction. I've heard a lot of introduction in my speeches in different places, but somehow they are pretty much superficial. And this was really a very, I would say, prepared and with a lot of details, and I really appreciate Mason for your introductory speech. So. For the lecture tonight, I prepared a couple of projects somehow to speak what is possible in architecture today. In architecture which is somehow going in two different directions. On one hand side, the offices which somehow pursue kind of a conceptual discourse, more or less leaving it on a paper or in a kind of an immaterial level. On the other hand side, the hardcore practitioners, kind of a very commercial architecture. So it's very hard to somehow find the middle way, and for our office in a part of the world where we practice, we try to find this middle way. On one hand side, to have our projects built when it's possible, but the other hand side, not to forget a kind of a conceptual maturity or efficiency of our ideas. So I would like to share these ideas with you tonight, entitled, as Mason said, affordable utopias, and their relation to something that became a kind of a very general term, sustainability, which I would like to coin out from different perspectives. Sustainability not only in terms of technical qualities of the buildings, but in terms of psychological, programmatic, and even territorial. So, a few introductory slides just to give you an idea of the part of the world that I'm coming from. It's the main square in Zagreb back into the 60s. The socialism that we had after the World War II was not the kind of a thing that you know under the term of Eastern Europe. We were always somehow in between, a kind of a mediator between the East and the West. And the architecture that happened in the 50s and 60s actually is the most valuable thing of our architectural legacy that we have. And it's a kind of a ongoing inspiration for the generations to come. So you can see a main square which is actually a special feature because it somehow incorporates different styles, from the historic styles, from the architecture, even the fascist architecture of the 30s, like for example Marcello Piacentini, which is on the right side, you don't see it, but even to the 50s you see a kind of a little tower which somehow fulfills this whole ensemble of different styles, which are all somehow united into in this square. The socialist utopia, if you want, actually became so influential that people like Orson Welles used this scenery for his famous film The Trial back into 1962. So all these images of the exterior are shot in these new parts of the city which somehow incorporated this ideal of collectivity and everything else what has to do with public domain. So these are some of the stills from the movie. On the other hand side, our idea of modernity, which somehow is deeply rooted in a tradition of modernism. So this is our version of Unité. It has I cannot go into detail, but it has a very, I would say, unique section, which has, of course, been based on Unité d'habitation, but in the same time, it somehow recreates this idea in a much more compact way. On the other hand side, the place where I teach at the moment, next to the one in Madrid, in the city of Split, which is on the Dalmatian coast, is actually a city which in the past was a villa of the Roman emperor, Diocletian. And you see a kind of a depiction of this villa, how it was in the past. You see Cardo Decumanus and all these elements of Roman architecture. But later on, this villa became a city. So this saying that a city is like a big house or vice versa actually functions and could be seen in this example very well, that somehow the capacity of a structure to withstand the changes that life brings into architecture, it's a kind of a ongoing compendium of ideas and experiences that we can get out of this example and use it as a pretext for all our future efforts. It's also very influential for our students, but also there was a number of workshops based on the palace and its transformation in its 20th century long run. And you can still see these constituent parts of the Roman structure somehow fulfilled with life. And this sort of processed architecture, which transforms in time but still somehow maintains its principal qualities, is something that we take almost as a point of departure in our work as well. In the modern time split, housing has also, I would say, kind of a good grounding. But you can see how these sort of clean, I would say, very platonic treatment of the surface has been remodeled by life, be it a kind of a cleaning and drying the laundry, or putting a kind of air conditioning unit. So this is kind of a free transformation of this modernism, and I still think that it doesn't harm the whole. We will see some more examples later on. The idea of balconies and like extended areas of living is a very, I would say, interesting feature in Split, because there is a trend of buying a part of a balcony. So the property does not fit into this partie wall or the dividing wall, but somehow there is a kind of a play of negotiation that you can see that these properties are shifting, and it's a very, I would say, very fine example how life can transform these modernist Platonic solids into something very lively. And working and living, be it in a garage, it's a kind of a very, I would say, very modest, very primitive, but still a kind of an idea of joining these two spheres in different ways. So this is also kind of a motivation for us to deal with that, to analyze it, and to go beyond that. Talking about utopias, talking about sustainability leads us to a scope of very different notions, different standpoints or points of departure that we can take in this field. So being sustainable does not necessarily mean that you have to prove how many watts per square meter and degrees of Kelvin you will spare. It is a kind of a term that we understand much more broadly as a kind of a, I would say, on intellectual level, which is much more broader. So, as I said already, we understand sustainability as an idea which can be applied to the social sphere, to territorial sphere, to typological sphere, and some others, so I will show it in the projects. I would like to speak in terms of something that we call eventually ambient intelligence. I think it's a term actually borrowed from IT sphere, and you see some terms here which are actually related to the IT sphere and the world of computers, but could be also applied to our profession in a very successful way. So if you get these explanation what embedded context-aware, personalized, adaptive, anticipatory means, could be a kind of a very stimulating set of words that we can try to translate into our domain. As Mason said, I made a very fine experience here in Canada 3 years ago. In Calgary, we made a 2-week workshop there, and much to my surprise, I thought that homelessness is something like a kind of a general or even more like a cliche here in Canada. But as I said, I was very surprised that they were very happy to deal with this term that obviously is not being dealt so often, or not in a different sort of ways. So we somehow tried to address this idea, also thinking in terms of efficiency, in terms of dealing with the market, that we have to address these things in a very, I would say, straightforward way, not simply as a kind of a utopian longing for a better world, but in the terms how can we invest somewhere to get kind of a feedback, a kind of a benefit that would contribute to the depraved and also to the ones who are providing this money. Talking about the public domain, as it was said in the introduction, public space is definitely something that stands in the center of our interests. Even for my students, I keep telling them that it is the utmost, or the first, if you want, the first duty of architect to be responsive towards the public domain. So it can be identified with certain, as a kind of a very emotional topography, that you identify certain places with the people you know, that you remember, or some gatherings, of some events. So this is one reading of a territory. There are, of course, very many different ones, like, for example, the distribution of McDonald's restaurants in the States, or the one like a kind of an artist's denomination of US states into something else, and in this game of relabeling, kind of a new creativity arises. The question of time is also a very valuable tool in, I would say, not architecture only, but in planning as well. So how to build in a certain time component into architecture and territory. This image is a very, I would say, good for giving you kind of a idea how time and territory could eventually relate. Density, of course, is also a very powerful tool that we use not only in tourism, which is one of the most important branches of our economy, but in terms of planning the cities, and also planning the cities as a kind of a smooth beauty of sameness, and a kind of a plaidoyer that we cannot build a city out of icons, as some of the architects might eventually think of. I'm coming from New York now, and I was visiting for my second time the High Line, and it's really very, I would say, surprising to see how architectural icons and jewels are sort of arising along this path, which actually maybe does not deserve this sort of special architecture, an architecture which has a kind of a housing function, could do better with normality. So this is the idea of a city which is somehow a kind of a delineation of solids and voids, void as a kind of a public space, and eventually an icon could arise in a very special occasions, but I will come to this notion later on. The idea of communicating in a public domain is very important, so we have to introduce a kind of a meta-language, if you want, somehow to put ourselves into the light in mediating the capacity of a public zone. As I said already, we have to make it a bit more denser on the side, to make a bit more space in the middle. So this question of portioning the density also somehow stimulates the creation of a public space. The public space has to deal with the scale. This is the first time, actually, in the history of architecture, that architecture was done with immaterial means. That it means that we don't need necessarily to have houses. Even if the example might evoke some bad memories, but in the same time, it's a kind of a immaterial architecture, architecture of events, architecture of orchestrating the masses, the lights, the happening, the time component into something very big. On the other hand side, we can speak about the nanoscale. It's an example from Zagreb, where a kind of a recognition of these little niches of spaces that could be also operative should work as a kind of a game of the opposites. Public space can be politicized, as an example from Jerusalem. So kind of a space that we want, a space like a space of desire that we cannot actually use. Public space in different culture also has different means of symbolism, like, for example, the main square in Kabul, where the people use the missile as a pivot point of their public space. Or, in some more mildly versions, this sort of, I would say, surveillance that is mildly present even in the campuses, like, for example, in Harvard. Sometimes, as I said before, we do not necessarily need a built structure to form a place. So sometimes it's enough to recognize, for example, like this area in Scandinavia, where the architects simply had to recognize the capacities of this old quarry, to equip it with a certain infrastructure and to make a fantastic scenery for a number of cultural events. So sometimes it's just enough to be observed or attentive enough. Of course, we also need infrastructure, so we as architects also cannot just let our dreams on the run without dealing in terms how to supply all our ideas. In the same time, we have to find a way to deal with the market. We have to deal with the part of the market which does not acknowledge I would say, democracy of a public space. This is an example from Russia, where this kind of prohibited gesture is being made. In the same time, I saw it also in Calgary. I was amazed by this difference of these pyramids, which somehow even prevents you to put a mat atop of it, because they are not equally high. So the mat would bend, you know. So it's a very, I would say, very refined way of refraining or stopping the people to have a nap there. In the same time, we have another example from the city of Zagreb, where a guy was using his credit card to get into this ATM zone to have a nap, to sleep over the night. So it was a kind of a blasphemy, or even in the papers, that he is using the bank as a place of staying overnight. So different ways how you can use public space, or an example from the city of Dubrovnik that you eventually might be familiar with, a famous tourist destination in Croatia, where you can make a very impromptu public space, just taking out the chairs, having a waiter, or using it as a kind of an open theater, as a place which is actually defined by the people who are using it. So you do not need more architecture than is already there. It can be, of course, also a public space which is politically profiled, or commercially profiled, or kind of a activist zone. It's a famous cultural ensemble from Slovenia called Laibach, which make their actions, their happenings in the supermarkets in this sort of way, somehow dealing with different ideologies, that of regimes and that of consumerism, and somehow try to oppose these two things. In general, we need a certain space that we can call our own in this space, and there are different ways how to make it a bit more personalized, starting with situationists from the 50s, to these more, I would say, subtle and gentler and more feminine way of appropriating the public domain for our own domestic interests, or different actions performed by the market. For example, a kind of a commercial action by IKEA of transforming the bus stops into a kind of a lively domestic environment in the middle of Paris. The same goes for this commercial from Croatia, as a commercial for the bank. Gives you also a kind of idea of this immediacy or immediate implant of a domestic domain into a public one. The space, as we knew in the 50s, like in the project of Super Studio, like a kind of a homogeneous plate, only with occasional infrastructure, is today not anymore like that, but it's more of this sort of information. So we ask ourselves how to play by these rules, what kind of architecture can follow these exceptions that occur along the way. Or if there are no restrictions, like in this pilot project in Austria, where they dis-equipped the crossroads of any traffic signage, be it a zebra or traffic light or whatever, and this was kind of experiment that people became even more attentive by moving in a cars or as pedestrians. These obstructions are very well defined in a very, I would say, influential film that I keep showing my students. I hope that some of you are familiar with that film, which somehow elaborates the whole new imagery out of a certain set of obstructions that you impose on yourself, done by Lars von Trier, the famous Danish director. And finally, to finish this introductory part, is this game of soccer losing anything of its intensity by having a tree near to the center? Or can we still perform this game without being distressed or distracted? So this is a question that we have to keep asking ourselves. So now I will show you some project dealing with certain ways of utopian, in a way, a wish to make a society a bit more appropriate, more efficiently equipped with different infrastructures, be it a kind of academic or the one for learning or something else. Sustainability in terms of belief in typology as a powerful weapon in promoting a certain shifts that we can perform on this level. The first example is a project for a new campus in the city of Zadar. It's another city on the coast of Croatia. And it was, as for the most of our work, it was a public competition that we won back into 2009, I think. On your left-hand side, you can see a kind of a socialist legacy. On your right-hand side, you can see the single-family houses from the 30s. So somehow, in the middle, where this was a kind of a redundant military zone, we wanted somehow to reconcile these two typologies, or morphologies, if you want, using the both motives in our setting. So actually, we are using these slabs. These slabs for the dorms. We are using these tower houses as dorms for postgraduates and professors, and we are inclining all the public programs which are here. This is the Mensa, this is the library, and this is a new cultural center. So this was a kind of a layout, and with the public space running actually between them all the time. Actually, this is the typological thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We designed already a couple of libraries, and we somehow came across the belief that adapting certain technologies of the library in a present time does not mean so much, and that we cannot make it on time. I even went to visit the one in Seattle by OMA, and even there you can see that certain technologies are almost obsolete today, and that the technology even of the libraries changed so rapidly that we cannot follow with architecture. So we decided at this point to make a house that is simply a collection of nice spaces that could be used as a hotel, as a market, as a mall, and even as a library. So when the technology so supersedes in that extent the capacities of the house, the library wanders to some other places, and it will be replaced by some public programs. This is the idea of autonomy of architecture as such, the idea that was coined by people like Aldo Rossi back into 1980s, that architecture has a kind of a higher goal than the immediate function that it was supposed to use for. So the architecture as a discipline that somehow transcends this immediate use in a successful way. So this was the idea of the project of the library, the idea of the main agenda of the project, to have a kind of a concentrated perimeter, communication, and a set of boxes as public spaces where everything generates. The idea of architecture as scaleless and timeless. I cannot go into it because I have a lot of slides to tell you, so I just keep throwing the ideas at you that I hope that you will be able to react later on. So this is the plan showing these things, I think pretty clearly, how the whole functions. It's also a kind of a passive energy house by using these massive walls around and atria as a kind of a cooling element for the whole structure. This is a kind of entrance court, like in the Muslim architecture, like a kind of a narthex, like a kind of entrance garden into the building. And some other things. We are using walls simply to get bigger spans and not to have too many columns. So, but in the same time, they are providing shadow and this is actually needed in a city like Zadar. This is the upper floor. Circulation, which can be very different. The idea of a shadow, the building that stands in the heat but somehow withstands the heat without using the additional energy, was kind of a driving force behind the project. So this is this concentrated perimeter and some of the voids in the house. Next project is also founded on the belief in typology shift. It's a little project for a kindergarten in one of the suburbs of the city of Zagreb. You see the lot. This is the lot. This is the former kindergarten, the very small structure that was demolished. And we started by studying the shadows, which are really big on the site, by having a block on the south side and a very busy street running in front of it. So we somehow wanted to make a kind of a single-story building, but we didn't have the parcel which was long enough, so we moved the building from the shadow, and when we encountered the limit of the site, we have to bend it upwards. So this is the idea of having a kind of a structure like a mat building, a structure with courtyards, and by doing this, the courtyards become the terraces. So you will see it, how it functions. So this is the basic idea of having this very congested mat and then bending it over, using the suburban matrix for it's obvious and easy to acknowledge there. So this is the site plan. You see the atria, which become the terraces here. So this is a kind of a model showing this entrance zone. The building is completely done as a mat building. You see the structure and these terraces which alter according to the floor. Some 3D models for the competition, and in the course of building you see this idea of these voids that are done throughout the house very consequently. And the idea how to make this side which is facing the street communicative. Shall we glaze it? Shall we make a kind of a commercial facade? Shall we do something else? But then we came with the ideas that somehow are articulated by the artists in the history, like the one in this, which is called Homes for Suburban America, which actually exposes only the half of the house, and the half of the house is mirrored. And we took this fine example of art as a point of departure of our project to completely glaze the elevation and to relate it to the house. In Croatia, this kind of a pedophilia or threat of pedophilia is very much debated in the press as well. And I got information from my son, who is also present at the lecture today, that his friends call it the pedophilic supermarket. Actually, a kind of a idea that these people can simply enjoy the scenery. But I think that the whole idea is overrated, and that we have to make a house that somehow responds to the environment, which is not confined within its own walls, that has to have this sort of imagery. And this is how it functions in the reality, and nobody ever complained about these things later on. So this is the back side. You see this idea of the terraces and the final terrace, and we had to promote this sort of secluded playgrounds in the outer space, because this, as you see, the site is very small. So this is the plan. I'm not going to go into detail of it, just to tell you about this so-called children's street. So the basic idea of the project is actually that we conceived the house as a kind of a didactic device of another kind, where we somehow decided that the people, the employees, should be equally treated and put in the same place together with the children. And out of this interaction, a lot of educational moments could arise, and the children would really behave like in a city, where they see a woman typing on a computer, where they see someone counting the money, where they see a guy repairing the furniture. So this is a kind of a experience of the house as a little city. So this is a kind of this immediacy of different professions related to the children, and we think that this is actually the level of architecture that makes us mostly content, not the design, not the articulation of the volume, but this level which somehow deals with the structure, which deals with the typology and tries to see it a bit differently around. So see this immediacy of this woman sewing on a machine, and the kids can see it. We use it even as our Christmas card for 2008. So this is from the outside, and some sections with the multi-purpose room and these gardens up there. We use this very rough render to have a kind of a protective imagery or appearance of the house towards the outside. We use this kind of a indigo children legacy, which I cannot go into detail now, as a kind of a point of departure for choosing this color. And there is a whole lot of different kindergarten projects that we designed in the last decade. This one is going to be built soon, we hope. So it's always this idea of having these gray zones, that is the zone for the staff, which are somehow intertwined with the yellow zones which are meant for the kids. So this is a kind of a number of exercises according to this theme. Next project is a campus of the university in Split, where I teach. So this is our Faculty of Architecture. This is an idea from the 70s of having this diagonal strip, which somehow should organize the whole campus. And this was our idea how to repair the campus and to give a kind of identity to the whole thing by recognizing a kind of a landscape zone with some amnesty for the houses which are built illegally. You must know that in Croatia is a country where people build houses without the permit and hoping that they will not get caught or that they will be abolished by the next law. So there are a lot of people coming out of this homeland war back in the 90s who built their houses without a permit there. So we somehow make a kind of an amnesty for them, combine the houses with the greenery and with some towers, as we did in Zadar, to make a kind of an entourage for the whole settlement, maintaining this idea of a diagonal and all concerning actually the project that we had to deal with, and this is the Faculty of Law in Split. So this is the idea of a house with a simple structure of 3 courtyards, again the idea of a shadow, of seclusion, of congestion. And then again, referring to the Diocletian palace, so you see the Roman walls, the Roman arches, that are somehow refined or altered by the necessity of today, that even such alternations could not harm the efficiency and the power of the overall structure. So this is a kind of a lesson that I already mentioned, that we took as a very important lesson even for that house here. And we took a different learning from aspects. I cannot go into detail now, I'm sorry about that. In trying to conceive a kind of a story of the house, one of them is this sort of stepped up way, which is traditional in Dalmatia. And we made a kind of a stepped ground floor or a foyer, which goes up the hill, which is consisted of three surfaces. So there are different floors that I cannot explain you in detail. The idea of these cantilevered auditoria, which somehow makes the courtyards more dense and more dramatic and more used, if you want, or efficient. Different levels. You see the cantilevered auditoria in the courtyard. And this is this idea even now in Dalmatia, that if you make a kind of an arch, then you will have a house which has more dignity. So you have to take whatever it takes, or you have to do whatever it takes to make a house with arches in order to attract more tourists and to sell it for more money. So this is a kind of a feature that happens all over Dalmatia. So we said, let's go for it. Let's try to investigate the power of the arches, if we can use it as as a motive for our house, so we make them double story, and we use them as a kind of on one hand side as a structural net for these steel building which will be inside. So actually this concrete net takes all the horizontal load and actually works as a statical structural stiffness of the house. But this is actually the most important diagram. We use it as a kind of a framework for a variety of different features which happens behind this first plane and which really could be adapted in course of time. So if one make this as a kind of a blind arch in the future, or opens this one, or adds a staircase, it really doesn't matter. It's the idea of having this overall structure, the main logic of communication of voids and solids. Everything else is somehow left over to time to make it better. So this is the idea of the house. We even use these temporary ephemeral structures like these plastic houses to introduce them into our public zone as something which is also adaptable, transformable in time. And this is the final image of the house, and we are pretty well with the planning. We hope to start building very soon. The next idea that I would like to share with you is a belief in efficient technologies, sustainable technologies, which could somehow be also kind of an economical way out of the poverty that we find ourselves at the moment. And in the same time, an answer to the question if we are supposed to create icons. As if you remember the slide in this snowy atmosphere with a little plane, then of course there are most of the cases where we are not supposed to do it. But if you are asked to do a main national sports stadium in our capital of Zagreb, then maybe it is a chance to go for icon, to make something that a whole nation can stand behind and identified with. So we came upon this idea of making a kind of a hill, and with like a little topographical accent with its own cloud hovering above it. So this as crazy as such. So we somehow try to argument this, that there are actually a legacy of sport hills in the city of Zagreb, seen from the airport. The first one is the biggest garbage dump, which could be recreated in a kind of a recreational facility. We have a mountain where we have our World Cup ski series here, and why shouldn't we have another one as a kind of a sports hill for soccer? It's actually the location. It was also a kind of a public competition that we won in 2007 in the middle of the city, where near to the main city axis. And you see this blue mountain here. Actually, about the idea of this cloud, actually we call it 3 symbiotic partnerships. As a shark has its own little fish to clean him, as American president has his own AVAX plane protecting him. It was a time when President Bush was in Zagreb, so this is where the inspiration came from. So we equipped our little hill with its own little cloud, like this. And you see it from a distance, how it sits in the cityscape, like kind of a landmark. You can use it for different purposes. I will come shortly to that. It has a kind of recycled rubber skin, so you can use its sides for different activities. So this is how it sits in its surroundings. It's inside. It's done like a normal stadium. Let's put it like this. Even though it's made out of this steel cladding, I will come to that. It has even its own funicular connection. This is how it looks from the outside, so it can be used for a number of sports because it's like a tartan, like this athletic rubber that you can use. You enter by taking a slope and entering to this intermediate level, and then from this intermediate level you go down or up, and this is the skin. What actually I would like to point out is this thing here, actually the lightweight roof. In a competition brief we were asked to have the pitch open in the first stage, but in the second stage that we should close it. So this has this helium-filled membrane structure actually has proven to be the most easiest and most direct answer to the question how to close it, so we can manipulate the cloud or the zeppelin or whatever you would call it, so it can go down and cover this hole. It can hover slightly above it and offer ventilation, or it can be projected outwards and become as a kind of a signage into the outer space. This is how it looks from the inside. This is how it could be used from the outside, projecting the results or any other activities. And this is the point where I would really like to stay for a moment. Actually, it's a really primitive concrete stance construction with a kind of also very primitive steel construction on the outside with corrugated panels and sprayed rubber, and two ways of cables which are attached to this middle ring with PTFE skin and some polycarbonate domes. Actually, the lightweight roof that does not exist in construction of stadia in the world today. So we were pretty much hoping that this could be a kind of a very nice example how to make a very cheap building. For your information, we even calculated the cost. It would cost around 130 million euros. So it's about 200 million Canadian dollars, I think, something like that. If it tells you something, I'm not sure, but it's really a very cheap stadium for 50,000 people. So we were happy about this part of engineering work that we provided, making a stadium that could happen in a country which is really completely bankrupt. And this is the final image, how it could look from the outside. But up to this very moment, there is still hesitation whether they should build it or repair the old one, so nobody knows what happens in the future. And this is the final image in how it sits in the cityscape. Another little exercise dealing with the belief in technology is a little pavilion that we did for an exhibition in Zagreb, for a triennial exhibition called Zagreb Salon, and we actually, as the winners of the last salon, had a chance to do a kind of a public presentation. So instead of doing a kind of exhibition, we decided to make a little pavilion. It was, logistically speaking, a huge effort for the office to raise about 500,000 Canadian dollars to make this house happen. So raising 500,000 dollars just from the nations, it's I think even for your relations here, a huge effort that we had to do as a little office. So we are proud that we did it. And actually we wanted to coin certain questions in architecture today, especially in our local debate. What materials are okay? What materials should be avoided? There is a debate that materials like rendered polystyrene, or XPS as we call it, and plastic windows are the materials that we should somehow avoid or get rid of, that you cannot make a decent house out of this commercial materials. So this is actually our decision to make this pavilion only out of these two things. This is the site. This is the main square that I've shown you in the very beginning, and this is this little unused meadow next to the cathedral that we have used for this provisional pavilion that stood for 3 or 4 months there. So this is the very site before we started the construction. There are some manipulations in the model, so these fields will be completely out of this rendered polystyrene, and the other fields would be out of plastic windows. We used as a kind of a intellectual pretext the film by Buster Keaton from 1920s called 1 Week. If you don't know it, you can see it in YouTube. It's very funny, but it's very also nice, and we used it. Actually, the film is about the couple that gets a prefab home, but the jealous ex-lover changes the names, the numbers on the boxes, and out of this comes this monster, and this is the end of the story. So our question is, who changes the numbers on the boxes in Croatian architecture? Who makes it so awkward, not so appealing, not so socially correct? So this was the idea where we leaned on this Buster Keaton. This is where this awkward, not beautiful, or as we call it, beauty-free form comes from. It's not duty-free, it's beauty-free. So, and we try to make it, on one hand side, this exercise of dealing with these materials, trying to question the legacy and how the building industry in Croatia works, in the same time to make a kind of a marcation on the spot to create a new public space which did not exist on that spot before. So these are the different preparations to make all these windows different and so on. We had a lot of detailing and engineering actually to make this crazy project. This is the relation between the little chapel and its big brother. And in the course of construction, we issued a little booklet, all in our own edition. So this is during the construction. You see these panels. And these two entities that house is made of, how it sits in its setting. And actually it was used for a number of public performances because it's really next to the main square. So it was, I would say, relatively well visited, even though we hoped it could be much more embraced by the city and its institutions, which did not happen, which is also a kind of a indicator of the times or of their sensitivity, if you want. Inside we had the projections of these movies, somehow trying to, for the visitors to bring them near to the statements that we wanted to issue by the building. Something about the detailing, which was relatively good for this sort of temporary building. We had even a little kind of a little altar here with some information. The students of architecture provided a kind of a ongoing presence and information for the people about the pavilion. And we also achieved some sort of, I would say, magical appearance of the house in the night. And this was the end of the story. Then I have to speed up because we are a bit more tight with the time. I have actually 3 more projects to show, so I will try to make it as short as I can. The next 2 projects are also actually in this zone of dealing with sustainability of the social domain, how to relate to the depraved people. In this part of Europe, the population of gypsies is very present, and actually I was called to do a workshop in Macedonia, a country which is just near to Greece, actually. And in a very nice setting, we had a workshop for 10 days, and we thought that instead of doing these workshops as they're always done by doing some kind of drawings and at the end going home without doing anything, we said let's do something like Rural Studio does, things that can go under the slogan learning by doing. So let's do the house. Why should we do the house? We found out that the population of gypsies in that little town is very present, and that we should make a kind of a public space for them. So we decided to make a pavilion that would also serve for a number of their public activities. So in the first 2 days we draw the plans, then we started to assemble the panels, then we put them on the truck, then we put them to the side that came out of the analysis as a best spot for them. You see these gypsy children. So these are the fundaments that we all made by things that we could buy in materials that were not used anymore. So this is the digging out for the fundaments, putting the fundamental parts that would bury the structure. So these are these welded parts that you can recognize. So, and the assemblage of the whole structure. It was interesting, the interaction with the local community. This was actually my interest to bring students near to their users and to make a design that somehow is responsive to what they need, what they want. So they provided help and advice, and there was always gypsy music playing in the background. So it was a kind of a multi-sensorial experience that the students were exposed to. So they even, it was in 2006, it was the age of breakdance, if you remember these sort of things. So some gypsy guys did the breakdancing on the platform, even it's not finished. So a lot of work was done, and towards the final result, and we had a big party, and actually the gypsies used the pavilion for a couple of months, and then it disappeared. It was completely disassembled. Everyone took beam or steel part or everything, so it was kind of a very recyclable thing, very, I would say, fashionable from this point of view. But as I said, it was a good exercise for the students. Next time we had to deal with the gypsies was in an official competition, a very strange competition, which was done by the city of Zagreb in one of our southern suburbs. This is actually the whole suburbia or agglomeration occupied by the gypsies. Some of it's illegal, but most of the houses are built completely illegally. So this is the map. And the city of Zagreb decided to make nothing less than a cultural center for them, but also including a police station, a gym, a medical unit, and library, and this sort of thing. And they designated this site for this venture. But gypsies, as they are, in the meantime, built their houses within the premises of the competition. So in the competition brief, it was very sinister. It was a very sinister brief, which actually called us to wipe off the houses and to make a nice cultural center, which actually the winner of competition did. For us, it was a kind of a moral dilemma or a kind of a challenge to see the things another way around, to try to somehow find a middle way, how to reconcile or connect both worlds, the existing houses and the new program. So we started to see if we can find a kind of a interstitial space in between the houses by demolishing actually a few of them, and to insert the program as a kind of a residue into this enclave. So we tried by this sort of massing, which was proven to be too small and not efficient enough. So we came out with this idea of having kind of a wall with industrial shacks attached to it, which could fulfill the program. And this is actually our site plan. You can see it in the masses. These are the houses that you can actually assemble and buy and not design and make use of very efficiently. You just do the wall with its connections, and all the programs is somehow housed into these industrial shacks. Of course, we had the layers of public square as we would do in every other case. This sort of provisional, as the gypsies build, we also try to build in another way into our industrial sheds. This is, for example, a plan for a library. We even dealt with a very primitive way of energy recuperation within some of the public buildings. But the most important part was actually this public space that remains as a kind of a negative or a positive, however you see it, between the houses and between the wall. Actually, the gypsy population is the one that has this sort of necessity to perform, to expose, to show themselves, to enjoy, to celebrate. And this is actually just the setting for them, nothing more or nothing less. And we hope that by this image that this is a kind of a way that stands very good as a symbolic for our approach to architecture. So I will finish with two last projects very quickly. The one deals with, as you can see from this image here, with how to deal with the housing domain in the world of today. As our American friends are doing a kind of exhaustive analysis of this, so did we in our humble little part of the world, with the way how we can build social housing which is congested, which is dense, which is not land consuming, which is really a kind of a density that could be fine. And an example of this is in one of the suburbs, actually the former village, which became a part of a city sprawl. We designed this little settlement. We call it Rural Mat. This is the settlement before. You see the church and all the things that are significant for a village situation. This is the side between two streams of water. And actually the procedure, we took actually the standard semi-detached house and we manipulated this standard semi-detached house towards something which is more congested, which is more individualized, as we call it, individualized housing in the group, and we call it rural mat. Rural because it's a village, mat because it's like a kind of a mat building, very congested, flat, introvert, and so on. And this is a kind of a procedure that we did with the project, trying to arrive to kind of a more congested entity that would also have kind of a public space. This is one of the mats. The carports, the gardens, the terraces, the outer space and inner space, that somehow this transition is provided. And actually every unit has its own entrance. It's really individualized. This is the whole setting. We also took the half of the cars away into this carport, so the presence of the cars is not so big. We have a principle that we have to use 2 cars per unit. This is the model of the whole thing. We even do the prefab barbecues to somehow promote this lifestyle. This is our design. We did it with a local firm for these prefab barbecues. But actually they, at the end, didn't come into being, but you can see them arranged here. To arrive to kind of a congested variety of inner and outer spaces, and this is how it looks like in the realization. It functions very well with materials that are not so cheap, but actually we can build in an average of 750 euros per square meter of brutto surface, so it's almost a standard in this part of Europe. You have a notion of the city center. You see the entrances, one here, one through this patio, and one inside here. So every flat has its own privacy. This is the carport. From another side, some other entrances, and again, relation to the village, and some facade details. Okay, I will finish with 2 territorial projects, actually, which somehow put sustainability or these utopias on a different level. That is dealing with territory in a certain way. This was a competition that we completely lost for the city of Pula, also on the Croatian coast. The idea was actually they wanted to actually make a pavement for this part of the promenade, actually. But somehow we thought that it's not the right question to ask for this city. There are a number of redundant military sites or unused sites that we have to deal with. How to deal with this industry, the shipyards, and everything else which is characteristic for this part of this, for this town. And how to make a kind of a rich variety of sceneries, of happenings, which are not, as I said in the beginning, all of the physical profile, which are more in terms of events and how to orchestrate different rhythms and different densities of people and happenings. And this is like a kind of a maritime ballet that we wanted to suggest on this, where we are using the sea as a equally important part of the site as the one which is on the solid ground. So this was the idea, to use the both entities as one, and arriving to a certain ambience of the new and the old, and to make a city as a kind of a new entity. I will finish with this project that was a big competition that we won a year ago for a new university campus in the city of Zagreb. We are proud of it because it was an international competition in terms of the jury. The jury was international and very good, with people like Julien de Smets, Kees Christianse, people who are very well known in Europe. I don't know how much familiar you are with these names. But actually, we are happy that they participated in the jury, and we are even more happy that they have chosen our project. I start with this artist's impression. It's a famous Croatian artist, Josip Vanishta, and this is a kind of a photo. He says, artists brings his painting back to nature. It was a kind of a happening back into 60s, where he got his famous painting and he throws it away or returns it to the nature. So this was a kind of a starting point to deal with this huge site, which is about 100 hectares. I don't know if you are familiar with hectares. 100 hectares is 100 times 10,000 square meters, so it's a million square meters for the whole site. For a completely new campus, also a part of these not anymore used military premises in the city of Zagreb. So this is a view from the north towards the south. This is the whole site. So we had to come out with a new way how to interpret education. For example, this is a graffiti from Madrid, where I teach as well, which says "Stop Bologna." There is a Bologna treaty regarding the new way how education should be maintained in Europe of today. But of course it has its pluses and its minuses, and we are trying to somehow to suggest a certain differences how we could stage education of tomorrow. And they, even in the competition brief, they state very clearly, show us, give us the future, give us the future. So, of course, if we look at the future, we have to look back into something which was a visionary in the past. So I hope you are all familiar with these images of Frank Lloyd Wright and his Broadacre City, where in his illustration there's a lot of Flash Gordon-like sort of structures and things which go into the future. So, but in the same time, I would say a fantastic plan which shows this coexistence of different typologies of different programs which all take advantage of one another, and which could be a nice point of departure for different projects. This is the city of Zagreb. This is a drawing of an architect, Antolic, from the 50s, where he speaks about green fingers coming from the mountain deep into the city. So this is our addition to his drawing, like another finger that goes even to the main river of Sava, even to this point here. So we extended our task from the campus, which is here. So we are making a kind of sequence from an already existing park through our new campus, through this gypsy settlement, all the way to the river, suggesting that we can find a nice Olympic site here. Zagreb 2084, we think that even for a country like Croatia, that this is distant enough that we can recover and dream about Olympics in Zagreb at that age. So we made up a setting with all sort of programs. We made a kind of a analysis of the bigness of the Olympic sites and so on. So we thought that this sort of vision that architects should provide to the city is very essential, even if we were not asked for that in terms of competition. What we were asked to do a kind of a campus, but we started with this idea of a famous graffiti writer, Banksy, that you are maybe familiar with, the English guy, with this example which says park, ink, actually not parking anymore, we should go for a park. So this is how we responded to the brief. This is a real text, this is not a translation because the competition was in English. And some of my colleagues said, you're crazy to put this sort of text, they will definitely throw you out of the competition for expressing such rude words and pessimism in the whole venture. But we think at least, let's go to at least to do a park. If we cannot do something like this in a country which is really not able to for bigger investments, let's do a park and let's keep it for later. So the park which already exists is here, so let's make a new one here. And let's see what happens in the future. These are the layers of the whole project with all the buildings and everything which was stated in the program. But what we were, of course, more interested in this course of time. We definitely think that urban planning has to do with time, that we cannot produce a frozen image, that we have to do a kind of a very gradual transition from a tabula rasa, which is actually like this, into something which is moderately planted or landscaped, into some buildings towards the final saturation. Of course, we use the knowledge that we have, so Christopher Alexander, I don't have to go into it in detail. This is kind of a negative plan showing these clusters of the buildings. So these are the ingredients that, or the layers that are planned one on top of the others to make the whole of one of the cluster. The idea of a green nollie, you are familiar probably with Giambattista Nolli and his famous plan of Rome. So we are trying to make a green version of it, using the greenery as a full element and the space, these clearings of the greenery as this empty space, be it outside the house or in the house. This is important. So public space that penetrates from the outside to the inside, using the greenery as delineating element. These are some contours with some strange clouds above it, not like the one in the stadium, but a bit more different. This is the complete image of the whole site, linked to its surroundings in the different ways. I cannot go into detail. This is a view from the other side, where we have to even do with a kind of a transferium house for local transport and so on. This is a zoom of the whole structure, showing the variety of public space, be it river flow or a running track or different landscape parts, different typologies of buildings, which refer to the known examples like this, the Diana Memorial in London. We introduce ice skating track on this frozen river as a kind of a 2.5 kilometer long run across the site to make it as a kind of something that is similar to skating in Holland along the dikes. Or like paddling in summer, there's always this cloud hovering above it, like a kind of a big brother, like the one that you meet in Cambridge or Oxford. So then maybe one of the most important features of the project, we start by proposing greenhouses on the site of the new faculties. So we let the local greenhouse owners come there and rent them for a certain time as a kind of a placeholder. If it doesn't come as a placeholder, then this gypsy syndrome, which I've explained before, could happen very easily. So some politically viable guy would come and build his own production plant here. So we have to devise a strategy, and this is a kind of this placeholder strategy by using the real greenhouses here in the first page. And later on, when the faculty comes, they are simply replaced by the real faculty building until the final saturation of the cluster. Of course, urban farming is a thing that you are familiar with. It can be used in very different ways. It has even an application for that. It can be used even for people with disabilities, that there is a lot of benefits coming out of it in different parts of the US or around the world. And we have seen, you use it even here. So we wanted to introduce this kind of a gardening as a kind of an integrative element between the people who will own the greenhouses, between the people who live in the surroundings, and the students and the whole staff of the faculty, as a kind of a common denominator to start the process. The plan is so big that we somehow needed a third dimension, something that gives a kind of a visual presence of the campus on the site. So we also thought that it would be good to have a kind of a nebula or an agglomeration of clouds that would hover above it. And we actually found it in a shop 1 kilometer from the site. There is a very ambitious group of people who got the EU grants for designing a kind of meteorological balloon, and they are very advanced in this. So we used their technology, and they were very happy to use it to have a number of positive effects, be it lightning, be it shadow, be it observation, be it even artificial watering, different activities that could be performed by these clouds hovering above this public zone. So we somehow took what already exists on the site and we introduced it into this almost impossible looking scenario. The most important sustainable part of the project is not the houses but the treatment of territory. We did it with an office which is based in Serbia, which is very well in this job, and they work with people like OMA and such with this. And actually their advantage is that they treat the whole territory as a kind of a sustainability device. So their idea was to make a kind of a structure that has a kind of a propulsion of the wind that would cool the buildings in summer, and by using the right species of trees, be it evergreen or the trees without leaves, to modify these scenarios of cooling and or warming up the houses. There are also water treatment surfaces where we are using this lagoon and the circulation of water. There we did the simulations of showing how this sort of seclusion of the trees could benefit the houses themselves in terms of heating or in terms of noise. We also are using the underground water that we found in certain positions of the site to recuperate, and with this energy heat exchangers and so on. I cannot go into detail about that. So we used all possible systems. These are the ones that you are more familiar with. This is, for example, one of the typical contour of these university clusters consisting of dorms, teaching premises, and some other that I will show you straight away. So I'm not going into the detail, because this is a relatively, I would say, general knowledge that we have towards the passive housing. And also providing a very, I would say, acceptable climate within these greenhouses that would be used for knowledge. This is the final energy diagram showing all the alternative energy sources, and ending up that for heating, that we can actually cover almost 2/3 of the consumption that is needed. In the cooling, we are almost there. In electricity, we also somehow achieve a big gain with these alternative sources that we are using. The houses themselves are designed as a set of urban rules, so we are not predicting the form. We are just giving the densities, a certain heights, in order to arrive to a number of different possibilities for the architects. This is the one that we propose and that we then developed further to simply illustrate the project. This is a kind of an article that shows that even in a camp, in a trailer, education can be maintained. So we took it also as a kind of a important impetus in proposing to have greenhouses as a design, as educational units. So these are the plans. So you see these tables for education on 2 levels with a lot of public space in between. These are the dorms, these are the faculty square and different spaces, some atria, a kind of a lively environment within the perimeter of the greenhouse. Some profiles of the whole structure, a view from a dorm towards these teaching facilities. Some facades, another view seeing this river flow and the relation of the different clusters, and with the parking in the basement with an airflow. This is the detail of this square where you can see this immediacy of semi-public space and the ones which are more for learning or for the dorms. This is a kind of an image of teaching places and transition from one bar to the other or relation to the outer space. And finally, in the final exhibition, where all the competition plates were exhibited, the firm from our neighborhood actually provided this hovering cloud, and it actually hovered during the exhibition as a kind of a signature, as a kind of a promise that this future is not somewhere in the distance, but just around the corner. So if you want to know more, you can consult our 2 recent publications, one done with some other Croatian offices by Akhtar in Barcelona, or another publication that we did only as a monograph of our office or on our website. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I took your attention or your patience for too much time, and in spite of that, maybe there are some more questions, so I would be very happy to answer if there are any.
Yes, sorry. So are there any questions? Or is everyone just completely overwhelmed by... If you don't have a question, the dean will ask a question.
I'll get started. I thought it was interesting that you started with the a kind of Albertian analogy about the villa and the city filling in, and you ended on a similar note talking about the creation of really a kind of garden structure that would become a small city. So I'm wondering if in the range of scales you're operating in this idea of what was the word used with utopia, the
Affordable utopia.
affordable utopia, that you think that there's a kind of limit to the scale at which this kind of projective structure can operate. You know, in one sense, you're showing an historic frame, and then later you're showing a later idea, really from the 18th century, of the garden being the format for a city. But now we know that cities are becoming very, very, very large and unplannable.
Okay, so I think it's very important somehow to free yourself from this sort of thinking in terms of urban planning or doing the architecture or even interior design. So I think that we as people who deal with the space should somehow liberate ourselves and to operate on all scales. I think that this efficiency, operativity is the clue to these things, and it's simply very different cultures. I know that in America there is a big division between the professions and even between the different ways how architecture has been exercised. So I think that it's very hard to, even in Europe or even in such a depraved part of the Europe as Croatia is, to get anything being built. So we have a lot of hard time putting it really into being. But I think that a certain efficiency is a key word for me. You know, so you have to somehow think what could be viable. And as you can see, we go sometimes from very pessimistic scenarios. We are not. When you say utopias, then we say affordable. So not something like dreaming of a better world without having a necessary contact with the reality. So we somehow try to have this reality check and to see how things can work in the worst case scenario. So we think that it's very important to reiterate these questions and keep asking yourself what could happen if. And through this sort of continuous re-questioning or rephrasing the question, you might eventually come to some clues or ideas. I wouldn't even say answers, because actually the best thing for us as creators would be to conceive a frame, and when the life and its users would then give the final answer. So I think this is the most that we can hope for in architecture. This kind of a, I would say, very general approach, I would say almost say generic approach, which somehow can function then and can be specified by the users themselves. So then back to your question, I think that the question of scale is important, but in the same time you should really somehow keep exercising, shifting the scales from one to the other. So I think there is actually no, and actually, I don't know how you are being told in the schools over here, but actually we were always told that without an urban plan, good urban plan, even the best architects cannot help it, you know, or vice versa. With the best urban planning, then even the very, I would say, average architects could do a nice setting. So I think that the urban planning has this position as things that we should address in our work, and later on, and to set the stage for everything that comes later on, right? And of course, as a very important issue, which also transcends the limits of the discipline, is the idea of the process of conceiving a kind of a scenario which is a kind of an ongoing things that changes in time, and somehow trying to make this change possible, not to have a kind of a freeze frame of a little image that you have in your head.
Okay.
Thank you that we have a chance to listen to you, because you are, I think, one of the famous young architects in Europe now, and even you are published in like Krakow's magazine with I think the same high level of architects. And my question is, for you studying your winner's road from European competition, urban design competition, and my question. especially about the framework of this competition, because I generally can see this frame in every job. And I know that one of the smartest competition in Europe now is Europan. I know there are many philosophers and thinkers try to use this competition to improve urbanity in Europe. And how for this competition help you to build your credo as architect?
First of all, thank you very much for the flattering words in the beginning. We do not consider ourselves to be famous architects. We are simply doing our job in a small country. Whenever someone calls us, we go, and we like this sort of interaction. So this is the answer to the first part of an unput question. But you are right about European, especially in the 90s. It was a very influential competition, and I would say even accessible for your Canadian students, if they have one member which is of European origin. So I'm sorry to say that in the last decade it became somewhat different and not so groundbreaking as it was in the 90s. But still, it's now, I think it's 11th edition of it, or European 11 or something like, or 10. Or 12 even, yeah. So I think it was really a very important test bed for a number of young professionals. For example, MVRDV from Holland started with their winning entry in European 1, and a number of others. So it was really, it opened a debate on housing, which, according to me, is one of the most important and more sensitive parts of our profession, as this Buell also report also told us. It's actually also very important in America, in North America as well. So for us, in our specific situation, it was very important to get into this sort of networking and into the debate with our colleagues in different countries. So, for example, we have, I would say, a certain affection for people operating in Switzerland or in Spain, mostly, where architecture and urban planning are being used as a kind of, as I said in the beginning, as a kind of a integral part, that you don't have just the houses and just the planning, because when you have the kind of ongoing process. So this sort of conversation, this sort of gathering that we had 3 possibilities to build something with Europan, but nothing actually happened. I'm particularly sorry about the Glasgow project. That was pretty interesting, at least at the time, which we at the end couldn't build. But I cannot go into the detail now. It would take us too long time. But generally speaking, it's a kind of knowledge that we gained out of this context, out of these confrontations, if you want, with different other cultures. And I think for young people entering these sort of competitions, which were really very seriously judged and publicated and documented, I think it's very good to have this sort of feedback, even if you don't win, even if you don't build a house. So I would really recommend to you as teachers, I would say there are not so many very young people here, so I suppose most of you are engaged in teaching, that you should somehow stimulate your students to enter these sort of competitions, because they are very valuable to see where they are. They give them a very, I would say, precise position. We had a very interesting series which was called Think Space. It was a series of competition launched by our local Association of Architects in Zagreb. And actually our guest curator was Eva Franch, who runs as a director of Storefront Gallery in New York. And she had 4 sub-judges, which one of them was me, and the other that you might probably known were Teddy Cruz, Shohei Shigematsu of OMA New York, and François Roche from Paris. So 3 very, I would say, highly acclaimed professionals. And we had the theme of borders, psychological, political, moral, ecological. I think these were the 4s. And we had some very nice response also from coming from North America. I cannot get in particular into the names now, but somehow this was also a very nice possibility for younger professionals to enter this sort of debate. And I think for at least I see it from our European position that this sort of conversation across the Atlantic is very important. And even though this Buell report is not completely applicable to our situation, gives you an idea what are the tools, what are the aspects that you should become aware of by dealing with such a thing. So I think that definitely Europan and competitions like that could be a very nice educational tool for the younger generation.
Any other questions? Well, we really want to thank you very much for coming here and for a fantastic provocative lecture. Thank you very much.